If I asked you to tell me the three biggest risks facing your institution, would you know? More importantly, would you be able to tell me how well you're managing those risks? Today, we're going to talk about some ways to identify the most significant risks your institution faces and what you can do to protect yourself. This does not need to be a cumbersome process. My name is Rebecca Mazzone, and what I've learned from my 20 plus years in accounting and finance in the higher education sector is that money is a lagging indicator. What's most important is that you're thinking about how to manage the institution. But how do you manage the risk that something could happen beyond your control that could cause you to fail to meet your institutional objectives? After starting a compliance, internal audit, and risk management function for a large university with campuses in multiple states, then being chief operating officer for a small school, I realized that the most important components of risk management is awareness of what your risks are so that you can focus on prevention. The only way to accomplish this is to be very clear about what your largest risks are and make sure that all of your employees understand what their role is in a day-to-day responsibility of mitigating those risks. So today, we're going to talk about all 4 steps, and I'll also ask you to have the ability to take notes along the way, because I'd like you to leave with some action items. So let's get started. Let's start by examining how to look at your institution to identify the most significant risks. The first step is to understand your business and what you want to achieve, your strategic goals. Many businesses fail to start here and go directly into listing all of the risks that they're aware of, thus missing significant risks that may not even be on your radar. These strategic goals sit on a foundation of ongoing business objectives and activity. All of these objectives are supported by a foundation of financial health and stability. Risk management is about protecting your most important goals, not getting rid of all risks. The more you're aware of what risks could cause you not to be able to service your customers or protect your employees or keep your technology platforms up and running, the better you will be able to reduce those risks. Consider that your strategic plan includes expanding into online learning. Will you be able to attract top talent to teach in these programs? Is your enrollment department set up to attract this different type of students? Is there a risk that your current students did not have good online experience this year and have created a perception that your institution does not know how to deliver a good online experience? What impact will these risks have on your ability to achieve a successful launch of an online program? Of course, you can't control all risks, so you need to remain vigilantly aware of external forces that could impact these areas, like changes to accreditation for online programs or the impact of regulations. Also remember, some risks arise from a failure to occur. For example, a failure to receive licensure, or inability to expand, or non-renewal of a major loan or grant. This is a good time to hit pause and spend 5 minutes writing down the first 5 risks that are top of mind for you as you think about each pillar. And don't forget those external risks and, of course, financial health. Now let's continue. The most overlooked risk is the loss of customers. Unhappy customers, customers lost to a competitor or a better product, lost because of your reputation. This drives whether or not you will have enough cash coming in the door to weather any risk. When I say we should obsess over our customer, this is really what I mean. Developing personas to help us understand, who are they? What needs are you solving for these students? How can you serve them better? Hopefully you wrote down a list of several risks that your institution faces. Now let's talk about a few more that you may want to consider. Again, feel free to hit pause as necessary and continue to write down some additional risks. Of course, we're all concerned with our reputation. These are things like the public's perception of who we are and how well we deliver our academic experience. And of course, now changing customer needs plays a very important role in this risk. What about control and compliance? This is something that, as finance people, we're generally used to thinking about. These are things like our ability to comply with regulations and licensing. Are there intellectual property considerations? Do we have proper internal controls to protect our assets and our people, and of course, our students? Hazards. Usually, we have great insurance to protect against things like fires, floods, terrorism, but of course, who could have predicted a pandemic? Other risks associated with human resources. And I think all of us are feeling the toll of this one right now as we have employees who are experiencing Zoom fatigue. And I think most of us during the time of the pandemic are ready to just get out of the house. So do we have the ability to recruit the right talent to meet our needs? Do we have appropriate succession planning in place so that for those most important employees serving in important roles at our institution, that we know what we're going to do if unfortunately we were to lose them? We always have to think about things like operations. And of course, we're very keenly aware of making sure that things stay up and running because we have to be able to support our students' needs. And of course, even when it comes to the changing demands of our student population. So, what will the changing expectations be in the coming years as it relates to technology or campus dining? Is there a different expectation that students might have regarding how they obtain their meals on campus, as an example? And then, of course, when we think about technology, the pace of technology is changing more dramatically each year. And as we look to the future, with the addition of things like 5G technology that promises to have holographic images in our classrooms, are we set up to be able to protect sensitive information of students, but also at the same time take advantage of these technologies to deliver an even better academic experience? And then, of course, we're all very familiar of financial management, making sure that we're thinking about our credit risks and our financial sustainability. This is a good time to hit pause again and maybe write down a few more risks that may have come to mind. So now that we've talked a little bit about how to identify risks, let's now think about how we prioritize which risks to manage. We do this by looking at quantifying them. So certainly if we spent all day writing down lists, that list would grow exponentially and certainly beyond our capacity to manage. So I like to do an exercise where I go through and identify each risk. How likely is it to occur? And this is generally in terms of high, medium, or low. So it's highly likely to occur. It is potentially likely to occur, or it's very unlikely to occur. And of course, this is based on my judgment. But then I also like to go through that same list and ask myself, how much would this cost me? So if this did occur in terms of lost revenue or additional expense, or certainly when we look at reputational risk, we can quantify that into lost revenue or expenses. How significant is this risk to impact me if, in fact, it were to occur? And of course, again, this is a judgment call. I generally try to create a rubric where I place ranges of value in terms of dollars and long-term impact. So, for example, high risk might be defined as total loss greater than 5% of revenue or $15 million. This would include things like loss of accreditation or loss of licensure, or even mean that the entire university is unable to conduct business or hold classes for a month or longer. And certainly during the pandemic, some of us saw examples of this. This can be something much harder to quantify, like a significant impact on our reputation. And of course, when we look at low risk, this might be something like total loss is less than 1% of my gross operating revenue. It may include things like a small fire in one of my residence halls, but there's no loss in my ability to hold classes, and there's little risk to my reputation. The point is that you need to set thresholds for what you consider significant for your institution, or you'll never be able to prioritize. This is what we call an acceptable level of risk. Let's start by talking a little bit more about this. Again, I like to keep it simple. Once I've gone through my list of risks and I've identified high, medium, or low in terms of likely to occur, and then I also consider high, medium, or low in terms of magnitude, how much will it cost me? I then like to plot them and to think about how is it that I focus on the risks that are most significant. Of course, I also like to consider velocity. What do I mean by this? Well, how fast could my risk change? When I look at things like technology, today I might consider that something is unlikely to happen. But 3 months from now, if it's related to technology, that risk could be significantly likely to occur. So the risks that have the potential to change rapidly, I just like to make a special note of those so I can go back more frequently than just once a year and evaluate my risk in terms of likelihood and magnitude. So hopefully you'll be able to hit pause and spend a minute going through that list of risks that you've already started to develop and just start to identify how likely is it to occur? High, medium, low, 1, 2, 3. And what is the magnitude? And even if you aren't able to quantify in terms of dollars right now, potentially just start with a 1, 2, 3 or a high, medium, low score and really think about what are those risks that would show up in that upper right area where it's high magnitude and highly likely to occur, indicating an area that you should focus on first. Now, let's talk about risk mitigation or how to manage those most significant risks. The only way that we can accomplish this is to be very clear about what are most significant. Your goal is to reduce the magnitude or likelihood of occurrence, or both. The most important actions you can take to manage is related to training your employees and building risk management into your day-to-day business processes. Examples are things like training employees for harassment prevention and doing background checks prior to hiring, or developing standard curriculum and having an annual evaluation process. Success or failure generally lies with our people in what they do or fail to do. Of course, we've all experienced significant increase in risks related to theft of money and data with technology, but we've also received benefits related to automated internal control tools. These could be things like automatic password changes and key cards to monitor who's coming in and out of our buildings, and access controls related to our technology systems that store our most sensitive data. And of course, avoidance is a strategy. If you have risks that are significant and you have not been able to identify any way to reduce the magnitude or likelihood of occurrence, then you may consider exiting that activity. So now ask yourself, how well is your organization managing each of those risks that you've previously listed? Again, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the best that we can possibly be. And just make a note of 1 to 2 things that you could do that would have the biggest impact on reducing each of those risks. Is it training for your employees? Is it setting email passwords to expire every 90 days? So this is a good time to hit pause and add some numbers to your risk inventory. And again, be honest with yourself. How well do you think that you're managing each of those significant risks that you've previously identified? Now, the most important action that you can take is related to training your employees and leveraging technology for internal controls. So hopefully after you spent some time going through your list and identifying how well you're managing each of those risks and also identifying some additional activities that you can do to further reduce the risk, we're sometimes left with some residual risk. It's just too big for us to accept. And this is an area where we turn to insurance. And insurance is a last line of defense, not the first line of defense. What do I mean by this? Well, if you buy an insurance policy related to, let's say cybersecurity, but you haven't done anything to implement technology controls to protect that information and to try to prevent someone from gaining access to your systems and your network, then your insurance isn't going to cover you. So again, the first step is to do everything you can to manage risk and then insure against it. So obviously we're very comfortable with the idea of thinking about, if we have a minor fire in a building and we have a deductible on our insurance policy, that's an acceptable level of risk to us. We've defined our deductible as an acceptable level, but we also know that if it were to be a significant fire and that building had to be taken down or gutted and then reconstructed, that certainly is more of a risk than we're willing to accept. So we purchased insurance related to that. So the other option is to transfer or to share a risk with a third party. And we're already comfortable with doing things like this. Many of us have captive insurance programs as an example, or certainly we can outsource some of our risks. Some examples of this: campus dining, we generally outsource to a third party. Some of us have relationships where we're sharing our Title IX or campus safety patrols with another school in the area. So insurance is one of many risk management strategies, yet we often look to it and believe it to be the only one. So just make sure that you're really thinking about when you need insurance and when it's important just to continue to manage some of those risks to an acceptable level. Now that you've identified risks and started to think about likelihood, magnitude, and your risk management strategies, I want to share an example with you. By trying to place a numeric score next to each risk in terms of likelihood and in terms of magnitude, this allows us to understand how significant the risk really is to us. And so if I think about an example where a risk is a 5 in terms of magnitude, but it's not likely to occur, that risk certainly does not deserve as much attention as a risk that's moderate in terms of magnitude, but it's also very likely to occur. So I like to multiply my magnitude times my likelihood. And this helps me to come up with an inherent risk score. Next, I ask myself, how well have we managed each of these risks in terms of policies and processes? Have we adequately trained our employees so that they understand what their role is in prevention? Have we automated our technology controls as much as possible and leveraged them to help us monitor the risk? What I do is that I score myself in each of these categories. And when I add all of those categories together in the blue column, this gives me a composite score to tell me how well I am managing my risk. And then what I do is I take my inherent risk in the orange column and I subtract my risk management score in the blue column. And what remains in the red column is my residual risk. This is the remaining risk. And this is what allows me to clearly define what my risk tolerance is. So I like to color these in terms of red, yellow, or green because it helps me to be very clear about where I want to focus first. I certainly can't focus on all of these, and I doubt that for any one of our institutions that each of them would be green. So generally, I start with the ones that are red, and then I ask myself, what could I do in terms of policies and procedures, hiring people or training them, implementing automated technology internal controls? Are there things that I can do to control that risk and reduce the risk further? And then, as a last strategy, is there insurance that I could get to help make that residual risk an acceptable level for me or for my institution? For example, if I have a cyber attack and all of my systems are ransomed and I've done pretty much everything I can do to protect myself, this is where insurance would come in to reduce my risk of loss to an acceptable level, very similar to how we would consider a catastrophe like a fire. So if you would take a moment and think about what areas might you think about implementing more controls in your risk inventory to further reduce each of your risks. Remember, the first step is to understand your business and what it is that you want to achieve. What are your strategic goals? The more you're aware of what you're trying to achieve, the better you will be able to identify risks and reduce those risks to an acceptable level in order to protect your institution. It's important to go through each one of these steps and be thoughtful about each. Identify each risk that could impact your ability to achieve your strategic objectives, and then quantify each risk in terms of likelihood and magnitude, because that helps you to focus on the most important risk. And then ask yourself honestly, how well are you managing each one of those risks? And what could you do to better manage each one of those risks? And remember, this is a journey. It's not a destination. You will never be finished. There are new risks that come each day. So be very thoughtful in your approach. I hope you found today's exercise very valuable. For more information on risk management strategies, training, or completing your risk assessment, please feel free to contact me.